Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This lecture is for BBA 8. The subject is International Business and Trade. This is our lecture number 14, which is delivered by Ms. Zahra Arif. This lecture is in the continuation of the previous lecture. The chapter which we are discussing was Globalization. So in this we will finish this chapter, Globalization. The changing demographics of the global economy. Let's move on to look how the demographics of the global economy have changed over the last 30 years. There are four trends that are particularly important: the changing world output and the world trade picture, the changing foreign direct investment picture, the changing nature of multinational enterprises, and the changing world order. Let us look at each one. How has world output and world trade changed? The first trend is change in the world output and the world trade. In the 1960s, the US dominated the world economy and the world trade picture. US multinational companies were powerful, and because of the Cold War, a significant portion of the world was off limit to the Western companies. Today, this picture has changed. In 2008, the US accounted for only about 20% of the world economic activity. Other developed countries saw their share of global economic activity decline over time as well. Developing nations saw just the opposite trend. Their share of the world output is rising, and by 2020 it is expected that they will account for more than 60% of the world economic activity. So countries like China, Thailand, Indonesia have emerged as global economic players. Most experts expect that similar trends will continue. Countries like the US, the UK, the Germany and Japan that were among the first to industrialize will continue to see their standing in the world exports and world output slip, while developing nations like China, India, Indonesia, South Korea, Thailand see their economies and the role of the global trade and investment increases. As you can see, the US, despite its decline, is still the world's largest exporter. However, China has emerged to the challenge the US for this position. How has foreign direct investment changed over time? A similar trend is taking place with regard to the foreign direct investment. In the 1960s, the US accounting for over 66% of the worldwide foreign direct flows. Britain was a distant second with just 10% of the worldwide investment flows. Today, investments by developing nations are on the rise, while the stock and the total cumulative value of foreign investment by the rich industrial countries is falling. As you might expect from our earlier discussion, developing nations like China have also become important destinations for foreign direct investment flows. My dollar store, for example, has been able to take advantage for emerging middle class in India. The company opened its first store in Mumbai in 2004 and has not looked back since. The company is modeled after its American stores and sells a variety of American products including Pop-Tarts and Doritos for 99 rupees. Now, it is bigger rivals like Walmart and France Carrefour are eyeing the market. This figure shows that the stock of the foreign direct investment by the world's six most important sources has changed significantly from 1980 to 2007. In particular, notice the decline by the US and the increase by the France and the world's developing countries. In this figure, you can see the growth in cross-border flows of foreign direct investment and also the importance of developing nations as destinations for investment. These two trends reflect the internationalization of companies that we have discussed. What is a multinational enterprise? The global economy has also shifted in terms of the type of the companies that are involved. A multinational enterprise is any business that has productive activities in two or more countries. Since the 1960s, the two important trends have emerged. First, we have seen an increase in the number of known US multinationals. Multinational firms from France, Germany, Britain, and Japan have become more important, and there has been a notable decline in the role of US firms. Firms from developing countries such as China and South Korea have also emerged as important players. So, in addition to thinking of American companies like Ford and Microsoft, we now think of South Korea's Samsung and Hong Kong Whampoa. The second trend is the growth in the number of the mini multinationals. China's Lenovo, for example, acquired IBM's PC division in 2004 in an effort to become a global player in the PC industry and moved its headquarters to the US as part of strategy. Traditionally, global markets have been the venue for large firms, but today, thanks to the advances in the technology like the internet, international sales can account for a significant share of revenue for small companies too. The changing world order. The final change in the demographic is the changing in the world order. The collapse of the communism has brought about new opportunities in Eastern Europe and China. Economic development and enormous population presents huge opportunities for companies. Mexico and Latin America have also emerged both as new markets and as source and production locations. Keep in mind, though, that while the growth of these markets create new opportunities for firms, the growth is also a threat. China, for example, is now home to the number of companies like Hisense that could become significant players in their global industries. To learn more about Hisense, see the management focus China, Hisense, and emerging multinational in your text. How will the global economy of the 21st century look? What will the global economy look like in the 21st century? Well, as we will discuss the world in moving towards a more global economic system, keep in mind though that this interdependency creates a new type of risk like the financial crisis that swept through South Asia in the late 1990s and the more recent financial crisis that began in the United States in 2008 and then affected economies across the globe. Is an interdependent global economy a good thing? We have been talking so far about the benefits of the globalization, but some people worry that the shift towards a more integrated and interdependent global economy is not necessarily a good thing. Critics worry, for example, that globalization will cause job losses, damage the environment, and create cultural imperialism. Supporters, however, argue that the globalization means lower prices, more economic growth, and more jobs. Anti-globalization protesters who fear that the globalization is forever changing in the world in a negative way now turn up at almost every major meeting of global institutions like the WTO and IMF. In some cases, for example, in Seattle in 1999 and in France in 1999, the protests have been violent. You can learn more about what occurred in France in the country focus in your text. Let's talk about some of the protesters' concerns. How do critics and supporters view globalization and job and income? Critics of globalization worry that jobs are being lost to low wage nations. They argue that falling trade barriers are allowing companies to move manufacturing jobs to countries where wage rates are low. For example, clothing and manufacturing has increasingly shifted away from the US, where workers might earn $9 per hour, to countries like Honduras, where wage is less than 50% per hour. Critics believe that this leads to falling wages and living standards in the US. Supporters, however, claim that free trade will promote countries to specialize in what they can produce more efficiently and to import everything else. They argue that the whole economy will be better off as a result. In other words, if you can buy an imported shirt that was made from penis in Honduras, you will have more money to spend on the product the US can produce efficiently, like computers and software. How do globalization supporters and critics view globalization and labor policies and the environment? Protesters fear that free trade encourages firms from advanced nations where there are costly environmental standards to move manufacturing facilities offshore to less developed countries with lax environmental and labor regulations. However, advocates of globalization claim that environmental regulation and the stricter labor standards go hand in hand with economic progress. So, foreign direct investment actually encourages countries to raise their standards. Studies support this claim, with the exception of carbon dioxide emissions, which appear to rise along with income levels. Advocates of globalization argue that by tying free trade agreements to the implementation of tougher environmental and labor laws, economic growth in globalization can occur together with a decrease in environmental pollution. A third concern raised by the critic of globalization is the world that economic power is shifting away from the national government and towards supranational governments like the WTO and the European Union. However, globalization supporters argue that the power of organization is limited to what they are granted by the members. They also point out that the organizations are designed to promote the collective interest of members and they won't gain support for policies that don't achieve this goal. Finally, critics of the globalization worry that the gap between the rich and the poor is growing and that the benefits of the globalization haven't been shared equally. While supporters of globalization concede the gap between rich and the poor has gotten wider, they also contend that it has more to do with the policies countries have followed than with globalization. For example, many countries have chosen to pursue totalitarian regimes or have failed to contain population growth, and many countries have huge debt loads that are stagnating economic growth. What does all of this mean for companies? Well, it means that managing an international business or any firm that engages in international trade or investment will be different from managing a domestic business for several key reasons. First, countries differ. Second, the range of problems faced by the manager is greater and more complex. Third, government intervention in markets create limitations for companies, as does the global trading system. And finally, firms must deal with exchange rate changes when they conduct international transactions that require converting funds to other currencies. Now, let's see how well you understand the material in this chapter.